Again, I'm going to keep this brief because Paraic is a damn sight more interesting than me, okay? All I'd like to say is one reason why I invited him, well, the reason I invited him, was I watched on Channel 4 what I think was the best news package from last year, and I was on Twitter frantically asking him to come and address you. I think this kind of stuff is brilliant. It's really sort of unusual journalism, where it's literally digging, literally going underground to find a great story. Since then, of course, Paraic has hit the news for other reasons, and all I'd like to say is, although we're welcoming him, maybe Russell Brand wouldn't be as keen to see him. But I'm going to get out the way and just give you Paraic O'Brien.
Nigel. Just for the next hour, I want to tell you the story of a story that we hear, which is the report that Nigel was talking about. So I'm going to talk for about 10 minutes at the start and give you an insight into some of the mechanics of how we found that story, how we went about telling that story. Then I'm going to play a little bit of it, and then I'll take some questions, talk for another bit, play the second half of it. But I want it all to be quite fluid because I don't have a script. This is the story of the people who live underneath Bucharest in a series of tunnels that were built during Ceausescu's time to centrally heat Bucharest. During Ceausescu's time, there was also huge institutional orphanages, and when his regime fell, lots of the orphans moved. I haven't plugged in my mic. Switched on my mic. Lesson 1 in the basics of television journalism. How's that? Wonderful. So when Ceausescu fell, these orphanages were shut. Not all of them, but some of them. And hundreds of kids moved out onto the street. Lots of them became addicted to drugs. Lots of them ended up having children of their own. And they moved into this tunnel system. So how did we find out about that? In January last year, I was sent to Romania on a different story to do with fracking in Romania, in a place called Pungest, which is in the northeast of Romania. And what was interesting about that was that a big American company wanted to frack their community. And it started a whole series of protests. And this strange alliance between farmers and their wives and eco-warriors started. And it became very militant, and it became quite violent, and we were sent there to report on that story. While we were there, we did that story. It took us about 3 or 4 days. We were very happy with what we did. And as is customary in the profession, on the last day of our trip, we went to Bucharest to get pissed. Myself and our cameraman, Jim Wickens, and a guy not much older than you called Radu Chornachuk, who's a Romanian fixer, producer, journalist. We were sitting around this table in this bar, and through a sort of fog of alcohol, Radu said, "Have you heard about these people who live underneath us?" And I sobered up fast. And I remember saying to Radu, "Hang on, what?" And "hang on what" are the 3 most important words in our profession. And as journalists, as would-be journalists, can I encourage you to really develop your hang on what reflex. It's like a muscle. The more you use it, the better you'll get at it. Most people find a way of ignoring it in life, and things come up in conversation, they move on, they don't want to have to deal with it, they're too busy, whatever. As journalists, that hang on what moment is what will define you. So I said, "Hang on, Radu, what? There's people living underneath Bucharest? What are you talking about?" He told us the story of Bruce Lee. Bruce Lee is a guy, one of the orphans, who he used to be a street fighter in Bucharest. I've met some hard people in my life, but Bruce Lee was on a completely different plane. He was thrown out of orphanages, spent time in prison. He was a self-harmer. He was a street fighter. He was a drug dealer. And he was running, according to Radu, this system, this community underground. So it was probably one of the fastest sort of commissions in television broadcasting history. There and then we said, Radu, we want you to try and get us down there. And Radu, we gave Radu about a fortnight. And what Radu did in that fortnight would be, you'll see the result in a moment, but what Radu did was he started forming relationships with these people who didn't want anything to do with journalists or English journalists or cameras or anything. But bit by bit by bit, Radu started forming this relationship with the people who lived in the tunnels. And the way he did that was literally, outside, if you ever go to Bucharest, walk out of the station, the Gare du Nord, you walk out the station, there's a traffic island in front of you, and there is literally a hole in the ground in that traffic island. And if you spend long enough standing there, they'll start to come out. And Radu spent a week standing at the mouth of that hole in the ground. Started a relationship. People came out. What are you doing here? I'm Radu. I'm working with Channel 4 News in the UK. We want to tell your story. How do we get down? And bit by bit, trust developed. Finally, he was introduced to the leader, Bruce Lee. And finally, he got to the point where he felt it would be safe for us to come down. So myself from Channel 4 News and Jim Wickens, our cameraman. We didn't know what to expect. There's lots of detail that I can go into, and maybe if you have questions afterwards about how we prepared for this trip that you're about to see. But little things like we couldn't bring a big broadcast camera down because it was too big and the spaces were too small. So we had to use a small DSLR job. We had to buy special pierce-proof trousers and boots because the ground was scattered in needles. They inject, as you'll see. And if we stumbled and fell and it pierced our trousers, we could have got HIV. We knew there were lots of dogs down there, so that's why we needed protective clothing as well. But the key thing in terms of making ourselves safe and getting the best story we could was having a relationship with the main protagonists. So when we went down, we had the permission of the boss to be there, so nobody was going to touch us, or so we hoped. So I'll just play you the first sort of 5 minutes to give you a sense of what it was like down in the tunnels. Can we dim the lights or something like that? Is that, yeah, cool.
You can travel to the heart of the EU from the station in Bucharest, but our journey is just a few meters. On the surface, the newest member of the club has worked hard to redefine itself. But there's another Romania underground.
Coming down.
This is the entrance to Bucharest's underworld. By late afternoon outside the station, they start to wake up, clambering up out of the ground, disorientated.
It's another gypsy, yes. It's another gypsy.
Among them a little boy, Nico. He agrees to send word down that we'd like to meet the boss. This world underground, we're told, has an overlord, and you only go down by invitation. A couple of hours later, and we're told he'll see us now.
Paraic,
Yeah?
you okay?
What?
You okay?
Yeah.
On our hands and knees, we pothole into a parallel universe. It's the heat that hits you first. The camera lens steams up. Then the music kicks in.
Hey. Hey, dude, how you doing?
Good one. You were running, yeah?
Yeah. Okay, thanks, dude.
If they had a club night in hell, it would feel like this. When your eyes adjust, you're in the first chamber. They call it the office. These are the lost ones. The children spewed out by the old communist orphanages have had kids of their own. When Ceausescu fell, there were nearly 50,000 of them in state institutions.
Mă cheamă Cătălina. La 11-12 ani. Da, dar m-au abandonat la spital. Aici m-am dus.
Viața, că nu mai am viața care o aveam, care trebuia să o am de copil. Trebuia să am o viață normală și eu. Și nu mai am o viață normală.
Almost everyone here is HIV positive. A quarter have TB. They're all making their way to the counter. The man on the other side is called Bruce Lee, after his street fighting days. He supplies the drugs. He calls the shots.
You want some coffee, guys? You want some
Yeah, yes please. Yes please, that would be lovely.
Ei, Guia! Hai să faci curat pe tunel! Tată, bagă... Tată, mai întâi? Da. O lingurică,
What does that mean?
Brutele rege al canalelor.
That says Bruce Lee, king of the sewers.
Și aici, când eram eu copilul, păi aici am crescut, în canalele astea.
I see.
Ai luat la pisici? Da. Am pisici de mai mici.
Pisici, da?
Le cumpăr numai pește, mănâncă peștele moarte. Dă-vă o siringă, vă, să scapi de el, l-ai pe cap.
Pussycats. Little cats.
On the cabinet where he keeps the drugs, a photo of the little boy we met outside, Nico.
E copilul meu ăla. Ala l-am înfiat eu de pe străzi.
It's not just coffee and cat food on the counter. For the equivalent of 50 pence, he sells bags of a metallic paint called Oralac. A synthetic drug similar to methadone is also on offer and injected. So I think Bruce Lee has asked us to go to see some of the other rooms, and they're actually cleaning the corridor ahead of our imminent arrival.
Dă-i tu punga aia, punga.
Give the bag, man.
Bruce Lee is warming to us. Time for the tour and further in.
Poate? Pot?
All good.
The tunnels were part of Ceausescu's grand design to centrally heat the city. Now, a sweltering drug den.
About half of the report we did. Just a few things that I wanted to mention. We did a follow-up to this film. I don't know, do you remember, there was a young girl called Catalina who spoke about how she had destroyed herself down in the tunnels. About maybe 4 weeks after this was broadcast, she died in Bucharest. Her heart failed. It was AIDS related. And her family invited us back to Bucharest for her funeral. and for the wake. She was a Roma gypsy, so there was a big sort of, there was a wake beforehand, and there was a whole ceremony attached to her funeral. And it was an amazing, amazing experience. We went back into this little, it was behind a tenement block in Bucharest, to a little cabin. And we walked into this room, and Catalina, who you saw in that film, was laid out on the table in her wedding dress, which is an old Roma gypsy custom, where if the women die young and haven't married, they bury them in the wedding dress that they never got to wear. So if you do get a chance to watch the follow-up to this online, I would encourage you to do that. Will we turn the lights up when we turn the lights back on? The most common question I get asked about the tunnels report is, how did it feel down there? And just to give you a sense of what that was like, we were afraid because we weren't sure what was going to happen. We were, to be honest, that metallic paint that they sniff from the bags, as you go further into this network of tunnels, the chambers get smaller and smaller, and they fill up with the fumes of this metallic paint. So by the end, we were quite high, actually. So that's how we felt as well. But the main way we felt was privileged. We felt privileged to be invited there. And we felt privileged to be welcomed there. And most of all, which is what drives many of us as journalists, we were privileged because we felt we had got a camera to a place where a camera had never been before. And we felt like we were listening to the voices of people whose voices had never been heard before. And that is what keeps me going in this profession. Because when you get those moments, and you don't get them, like, I'm a jobbing television journalist like anyone, and you get on-the-day stuff, and you have to produce television and report the news. And sometimes you get moments like that, and it is so worth it. You remember why you got involved in this profession in the first place. Does anybody want to ask me anything about that? Yeah. Not on the day itself, because the adrenaline was really kicking in, and your main, well, you're just as surprised as people watching it. It's just like, I cannot believe that this exists, and you're also thinking about how we're going to make this into a compelling report, and you're in professional mode. But I would be lying if I said that it didn't sort of personally affect the team afterwards. And if any of you ever do end up, doing this type of story, whether it be in conflict zones or whether it be in places that are with a lot of very heightened emotion, always give yourself time to sort of decompress, because it can be quite, you can suffer from a very mild post-traumatic experience afterwards if it's a particularly harrowing thing. I've got kids, one of them's here, in fact, she's 16, but I've got 16, 7, 4, and 1. So stories to do with children being hurt always get to me. But you have to allow yourself time to, get that out of your system, and have colleagues and friends and family around you to talk those things through afterwards.
Related to that question, how do you actually detach yourself from that and focus on creating a good piece of journalism?
Because it's your job. I'm not there to, because of the training that you're getting, for example, it's important. I believe firmly, I believe it's important to get a professional grounding in this trade, in this profession, in this craft of ours, because it is a craft. And once you get the training, and once you build up on your experience, you go down into a situation like that, and you're there to tell a story, not to get emotional,
Did you have to ask any permission from anyone from Channel 4 or anyone back in England before you went down the hole?
Yeah, we did. Yeah, we did. So we had to, the key concern here was not a legal one, because this wasn't a particularly legally fraught story, although we always, of course, keep the lawyers in the loop. the main concern was a health and safety concern, was because, you know, that's the primary concern in a situation like that, is that you have a team, you're responsible for that team, and no job in this profession is worth, you know, losing your life over or getting seriously hurt over. People often sort of complain about the health and safety forms that people have to fill in journalism, but I actually, you'll hardly ever hear a journalist say this, but I'm a firm believer in filling out the health and safety forms because it forces you to think about the safety of your team and the environments that you're going into. So there's lots of practical things we had to do and think about to make sure that we were going in to a place where nobody would get hurt. Hi.
Did you drink the coffee you were offered?
No. That's the second question everybody asks me, although I nearly did. Because I'm Irish and sort of somebody offers you a cup of tea, it's, oh, you know, you can't say no to it. So I literally sort of out of politeness, it was 2 inches from my mouth, and Radu just whispered in my ear, don't drink the coffee, because they were washing their syringes in it. Was I saying, hi?
Did you expect what you saw down there? Like, when I watched that, I was really shocked to start with. Was it a big shock?
Well, it was it was and it wasn't. I mean, it wasn't in that Radu, our producer, had been down, yeah? And Radu has got a great way with people and is Romanian and speaks Romanian and had developed this relationship over a week before he actually went down himself. So Radu, in his kind of broken English, had explained what was down there. But, you know, I mean, when I'm going down that ladder, I'm shitting it, to be honest. Yeah, I mean, we didn't really expect it to be like that.
Was there a point when you got down there and you got further into it where you thought, if this turns, I'm in all kinds of trouble?
Yeah, there was. And I'll tell you why I was like super conscious of that, was because at the end of the day, Bruce Lee is a drug dealer and is responsible in part for the death of some of the kids down there. And I wanted to challenge him about that. But I couldn't down there because the situation may have turned, you know, and become volatile. And there was no getting out of there. You know what I mean? That we're goners, you know what I mean, if that happens. So I was hyper aware of that. And so we let Bruce Lee talk, you know. There was actually not very many questions even. And I was conscious of, you know, flattering him and, you know, respecting him in his turf. Now, when we got back out of the tunnels, we did get a chance to sort of challenge him on that because we were in open ground and we could run away. But, you know, that was always in the back of our minds, especially as we went further in because it got narrower and narrower and narrower. You know, that was a very, very serious concern. I mean, to be honest with you, technically, we probably shouldn't have gone in as far as we did, but the relationship was really quite good by the end of it. So he was happy with this, and we felt. But that's a very fine judgment call, because I've been in similar situations where I thought the boss, because I do a lot of sort of crime type stuff as well, where I thought the boss liked me, and suddenly the wrong question comes out, and it all changes. And you do not want to be stuck down a hole when that happens, you know. Hey.
Did you have any, you say that they welcomed you and you felt like quite privileged to them. Did you have any hostile situations while you were down there? Like, did anyone not want to speak to you?
Some people didn't want to speak to us, but because we were under Bruce Lee's wing, they made it clear to Bruce Lee if they didn't want to talk to us. There's one bit which we didn't broadcast where Bruce Lee kind of rules this fiefdom with like an iron fist, and somebody had come down who wasn't supposed to be there. And Bruce Lee went over, like I remember him, he walked down to the end of the tunnel and just like beat this guy up. But that was that was their problem. You know, it wasn't ever directed at us because it was clear it was clear, as I said before, that we were there by invitation. Hey.
I was told that journalism is often about making a difference. So do you think this story
Yeah.
relates to that?
I'm not sure, you know. I've kind of been, I've been It's a good question because it's something that I've thought about a lot and to do with this film, because this caused a huge furore in Romania. There were questions in Parliament. It was a massive thing in Romania at the time. The problem with it is that there isn't any kind of obvious solution to this, because in the follow-up film we speak to the head of social services in Bucharest, who's an amazing woman. She's sort of the face of new Romania. She's a really progressive, forward-thinking civil servant. And she knows all about the tunnels. But she's made a policy choice not to close them down, because she believes that while the tunnels exist, these people are in a contained, warm place. She can monitor them coming in, she can monitor them going out. If you shut the tunnels, they scatter all over Bucharest and you lose control. So in a strange, counterintuitive way, even though there were parliamentarians in Romania calling for the tunnels to be shut down after this film, they didn't, and I'm glad they didn't. Any other questions?
Yes, I've got one.
Hey.
You very humbly mentioned that you won a Royal Television Society award for that piece.
Yeah.
Does winning something like that then mean that you are able to do more investigative work? Because we all know that budgets are being cut worldwide, particularly for investigative pieces.
Yeah. Yeah, it does. I mean, I had already sort of plowed that furrow professionally. I mean, the awards are fantastic and that's cool and all, but I wouldn't say that my job day to day has changed in any great fundamental way, because I was I've been doing this for a long time, and my bosses at Channel 4 News, I'm very lucky in that they let me do that kind of thing. Yeah. Will we watch another little bit? How are we doing with time and all that?
We're okay.
Yeah. We'll watch another little bit, and then if anybody has any other questions, you'll get a chance after the second bit.
I've never seen anything like this, to be honest. There's this network of tunnels. And this is quite an honor, I gather. We've been invited into Bruce Lee's room. This is his bedroom.
O familie sunt, cum zice, treaba societății noi suntem, nu? Suntem ultimul oameni. Da? Eu am încercat să-i organizez, să fac o fundație, să facem o familie, să fim organizați, să reprezentăm o putere, să ne întreținem singuri, să le arătăm la oameni că se înșeală. Că și noi suntem oameni.
There is bizarrely a twisted order to Bruce Lee's fiefdom. Social workers told us he tries to protect the young ones from sexual predators, and that addicts are less likely to die down here because he offers them a sort of safety and a warm place to sleep.
So we've just been told that we're being brought to another section of this strange community. It's called the Hotel, and it's basically like a hostel underground.
We go through room after room. During the winter months, this place is full. This afternoon, just a few couples
Uite, vezi ce pun acum?
lying on the artificial grass, holding on to each other.
Pentru că majoritatea, eu i-am crescut de copii mici. Ai înțeles? I-am luat de pe străzi și i-am strâns pe toți într-un loc unde m-am ocupat de creșterea lor. Statul nu doare nimica, pe nimeni nu doare nimica inima, înțeles?
Bruce Lee talks a lot, but the unspoken lines of another story are carved out on his arms, self-harming from the orphanages and the prisons.
Mama m-a lăsat la 3 zile din spital, m-a luat statul, pe timpul lui Ceaușescu. Am crescut orfelinate și când a căzut Ceaușescu, am căzut cum ar veni și eu.
He wants to talk about Nico again, the boy we met above ground. He's not from the old orphanages, he's the new generation.
Pe străzi, l-am întâlnit aici, pe stradă, mic, probleme, droguri, pac, i-am interzis să mai bage șiringa în el, să folosească mai lacul, dar i-am intervenit prea târziu.
He says we should meet the woman who looks after Nico with him. For that, though, he says we have to go upstairs and out of the tunnels.
Hey! Da? Ieși afară brusc?
Oh God, fresh air.
And thus begins the last bizarre leg of the journey. Bruce Lee, his minder, and about 15 dogs tramping across Bucharest. Above ground, he seems nervous, the Paraic bag pumping hard. We're going to meet a woman called Raluca.
I'm watching this, just a few other thoughts about it. For me, like, different reporters have different styles in terms of how they tell stories on television. For me, there's a huge amount of television journalism that's about kind of set pieces. So you're interviewing a politician, and the politician walks in, you set up the camera, you ask some questions. When you're finished the interview, you do some cutaways and 2 shots that you can use to the edit, and it's all quite staged. And by necessity, a lot of what we do is that way. What I try and do in the reports that I make is capture like real stuff happening. Not staged things, but do you remember when we're walking down the street there and that guy says, hey, have you got the full pack with you today? And Bruce Lee responds. I love those moments because that's real life. That's not staged for a camera. So, if any of you are thinking of a career in television journalism, that's something to bear in mind in the pieces you make. That nothing beats something like really happening on camera, as opposed to stuff that's part of the sort of choreography of our profession. Does anybody want to ask me anything else? Hi.
How long were you actually down there?
We were down there in total for 2 days. So we were down there for 1 afternoon and 1 evening. But Radu had been down there for a day or 2 beforehand.
Yeah.
Hey.
How big was the crew you had with you?
Small. Yeah. So we only had, there was me and, as I said, Jim Wickens. Jim Wickens is, he's a cameraman producer. So he, you're going to ask me what the difference is between a cameraman producer and a cameraman, and I'm not 100% sure, to be honest with you. But Jim is basically, he does all the camera work, but he's also wearing a sort of journalist's hat. So he will help you with interviews, and he just knows how to make he knows how the end product's going to look. And then we had Radu, this young Romanian journalist as well. So there's just the 3 of us.
Did he play the part of translator?
Radu did, yeah. It's an interesting one. Working in foreign countries with foreign languages is something that I don't think I've quite got right in my profession yet, because it's always difficult. You're desperate to know, like, what did he just say? And sometimes you have to let the translator do some of the work for you, even if you miss some of the point. And some reporters do it a slightly different way. They do it in a very clipped way. So you ask a question, the translator translates a section of the answer, and you do it in a sort of minute blocks. I prefer letting it flow, even if I'm not sure what's happening, because it feels more natural.
One more, it's hard to grasp how big the underground
area
was from watching on video.
Yeah, it is. So basically, there are lots of bits of the tunnels. So there's a whole series. But bits of it have been bricked off once this central heating system was closed down. So the bit we're in is probably, oh God, in terms of distance, I'm not sure, but maybe there were like 6 rooms running alongside each other. But then there's another section of the tunnels just down the road, and then spotted all over Bucharest, there's bits of tunnels with people living underground. Hey.
How did your opinion
Yeah, I know. Yeah, it's funny. I mean, I think we had been told beforehand by social workers that Bruce Lee, despite all of his flaws, which are many, looked after the people down there. So provided a warm place for them to sleep. And the other point that the social worker made was that there used to be a problem with this particular tunnel of sexual predators coming to try and pick up kids. And Bruce Lee had put a stop to that. So that was the interesting kind of dynamic. On the one hand, this guy is patently a crook and a drug dealer, but on the other side, he was looking after this weird community. And we went in with kind of an open mind, to be honest with you, on that, because we had heard that story. And I think he picked up on that. You know, I think he knew, he didn't feel like we were down there judging him. And I think that was part of what opened him up in the way he did. Hey.
If the tunnels got shut down, would you have felt responsible for it?
Yeah.
Were you aware of that when you went down there?
No. I hadn't really that thought through, because we didn't know what we were really expecting. Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, I'm glad they weren't. Hey.
How do the public and the police feel about the people living in the tunnels when they come to the service? Do they kind of get shunned and avoided, or?
Well, I think that, like, the police know all about this. Like they tried to close the tunnels down about 4 years ago, I think, and it didn't work. So like everyone in Bucharest knows about this. They were angry with us for broadcasting the film. The authorities in Romania were. Because remember, this is a country who is, you know, they've relatively recently joined the European Union. This is a country anxious to project an image of itself as progressive and European and modern. And to a certain extent, that's true. But this exists too. And I think some in the Romanian government would prefer that this side of the Romanian story hadn't been broadcast.
I need to be careful how I phrase this, but some of the media today seem to target Romania.
Yeah.
Do you think that defended them to Westernized people?
I don't know. I mean, that's something I've thought about as well, but haven't come to an amazingly insightful conclusion on. I can't do my job worrying about how the Daily Mail will respond to the stuff that I do. Do you know what I mean? Because otherwise I wouldn't do much at all. Do you know what I mean? Now that said, you have to be sensitive, you know, and understand the context of the stories you're telling. But, you know, as far as we were concerned, telling that story overrode how certain sections of the media might choose to interpret that or use that to bolster their own worldview. So we...
It's given a positive impact then?
Do I what?
Do you think it's given a positive impact on our media?
Do you mean... sorry, say that again?
Do you think it's had a positive impact on people watching? Because to me, watching that gives me a better perception.
Yeah, I think it depends who you ask. I mean, we had so much. I had so much stuff on emails and Twitter off the back of that, and it was kind of, there was all sorts of perspectives. Some Romanians were really angry that we portrayed their country in that way, even though that wasn't our intention. Some people were like horrified. One guy is in the process of setting up a charity off the back of the film. You know, people react in all sorts of different ways, and for me, like, when you're doing big stories like this, there's the story, and then there's the circus around the story once it's broadcast. And my primary concern is the story. You know, whether it's Russell Brand, whether it's the Romanian government, I don't care, really. As long as I'm solid in my journalism, and as long as I've told the truth, then whatever circus ensues afterwards is somebody else's business to worry about. We're time up, aren't we? Any last question?
Sorry, this is a little bit more of a statement. Someone spent 10 years having to fill in risk assessments in TV and amongst everything else. That must have been a nightmare filling in a risk assessment. When you go into somewhere that you're not even that 100% sure where you're going, how did you know about the precise dangers down there?
Well, Well, we kind of didn't really. I mean, you know, we sort of, we imagined how it, what a day, like we knew there were dogs down there. We knew there were, dogs and needles were the two chief health and safety concerns. So that was the thrust of it. But because we weren't 100% sure, obviously we had to just say what we knew and have a discussion about that with the health and safety people. But just in closing, I don't know what your guys' plans are for the future in terms of your career and all. But if you do remember anything about the last hour, that sort of hang on moment is I really encourage you to hone that skill, because that'll stand to you. We have time for two more.
I'm a bit shallow, but I want to ask about Russell Brand. Tell us about the Russell Brand.
Do you want to hear about Russell Brand?
A bit shallow.
Yeah. I don't know what to say about. I mean, like I like Russell Brand. I think, in fact, myself and Mary were talking about this on the train on the way up, because she's just bought Revolution. I think it's really important that his voice exists in society and stuff. In terms of the questioning on that, I don't know, do you know what we're talking about? Basically, I had an exchange with Russell Brand outside Downing Street, which was to do with a housing protest that was happening in East London at the time. And we did a 3-minute report on Channel 4 News about Russell Brand and about the housing demonstration, which is a very worthy cause, and they've won in terms of their battle with private developers in East London. So that was great. But as part of the report, because Russell Brand had aligned himself to this, and he believes very strongly in that, I felt it appropriate to ask him about his own, accommodation, and did he live in a big house, and was he part of the problem in terms of pushing up rents in East London? And he kind of had he went a bit off the rail on me, and that sort of got massive, traction online. And there was a debate about whether I should have asked the question or not, which I think that's my job. So as far as I was concerned, that's what I do, and kind of testing the tension between personally held views of a public figure and their personal circumstance and their publicly held views. Testing that tension is part of my job. And I think, journalists often talk about speaking truth to power, and they think about power as just being the political establishment, but there are all sorts of powerful establishments in society today, and celebrity is one of them, and we shouldn't be afraid to challenge that too.
What did you think of his video he made to explain the cause of his anger?
I thought it was patronizing, because he one of the things that the Irish media picked up on was this whole idea that, he said, as an Irishman, he should understand everything about, dispossession and land. It was like, what are you talking about, man? I mean, as if that was the only thing this poor Paddy brought to the table, was like an understanding of dispossession, Anyway, but it was what it was. Anybody else? Hey.
Looking back on it now, how does it feel as a journalist that a story in a bar turned into that much of a reaction afterwards?
Yeah, I mean, it's but lots of the stories that we get start in that kind of way, and that's back to my sort of hang-on moment. You know what I mean? They're little thrown-away sentences in bars or in discussions or on chat rooms or or a little bit of a newspaper story, like one sentence that you think, hang on, what? Do you know? Those little moments are the moments that all of this starts in. Hey.
Did he explain why he's wearing keys and padlocks everywhere?
Yes, he did, which is the third question everyone asks me. He used to be a street fighter, yeah? So he used to make his money as a Roma gypsy, bare-knuckle boxer on the streets of Bucharest. Nice work if you can get it. And he's lost, he's got a bit of a belly, he's lost his agility. So he reckons that by putting all these weights on his wrists and his ankles, as he's walking around, he's like doing a kind of a workout. The Bruce Lee diet plan. Go on.
Do you have anything like this planned for the future?
Yes, I do. I'm going back to Romania the day after tomorrow. We're doing a piece about the increase in HIV infections because more addicts are using legal highs. They're injecting legal highs more than traditional heroin. And when you're injecting legal highs, to sustain your high, you have to inject about 15 times a day, whereas with heroin, traditionally it would have been 5 or 6 times a day. And if you're injecting that much extra, the likelihood of you becoming infected with HIV skyrocket. So we're going back to Bucharest for that. But the best bit of Friday, obviously that's very heartrending and sad, is that we've got a team of anarchist death metal band who do their gig on Friday night in Bucharest and then go out after the gig, and they've got a decommissioned ambulance that they drive around Bucharest handing out needles. So we're going to a death metal gig in Bucharest on Friday night and then out with them in the ambulance afterwards.
How long does something like that take? I don't, like when you finish filming?
Yeah, that's a good question. It depends on how good your editor is the short answer. That took us 2 days. It doesn't always take that. Sometimes it takes longer than that, but A, we had a fantastic editor called Alex Mickelwright, and B, because there was a very natural chronological narrative to this, it's sort of, you know, it was easier to tell because it was like an arch over a day or two, and it was like the beginning, middle, and end, and this was our journey. Those stories are easier to tell because they've got a natural, chronological narrative. Hey.
Do you think, because Channel 4's classically perceived as, quite edgy, cutting, sort of journalistically, do you think if you worked for another station, like, say, the BBC or ITV,
yeah,
you would have been able to do something like that?
No. I left the BBC for that reason. Yeah. I used to work for the BBC. And I felt, don't get me wrong, I'm a massive fan of the BBC, but for the style of the type of thing I do, I felt it a little constrictive. I felt it didn't allow me to do this kind of stuff. But Channel 4 News does.
So they give you a lot more journalistic freedom?
Yeah, they do, yeah. But you earn your stripes, though. Without blowing my own trumpet, you can't just rock up and be expected to be given that level of freedom because budgets are tight in news. So you have to become someone who they will trust to be able to deliver this kind of thing on a regular basis, and then you're given that space to do that. Can I have one last final thought? Just people often ask me, for those of you interested in a career in journalism, people often ask, how do I get into journalism? And there are lots of different ways of getting into journalism, and there's placements and trainee schemes and lots of things. There's one way that often people don't tell you about, and it's get a great story. That's a surefire shortcut into the profession. So if any of you think you've got a good story, or have had one of those hang-on moments and have done some work on it and think you've got a story, email me. And if it's good enough, we can do something together. That happens very regularly in Channel 4 News. We get all sorts of people coming to us. We're sort of a very outward-looking, listening organisation. People, only about 3 weeks ago, actually it's more than that, it's about 2 months ago, a young woman called Jess Waite was in contact with me out of the blue, an email to do with YouTube stars, YouTubers becoming famous and how the world of YouTube was experiencing its own sort of Jimmy Savile-esque style sexual exploitation. She pitched that story to me, she did some work on it, and we employed her as a producer out of the blue with no experience for 4 days. So she's got that on her CV. So get in touch if you've got good stories.
I just wanted to say a few words just before we close. Firstly, I'd like to thank Paraic for an inspirational, honest, thought-provoking speech about an inspirational, honest, and thought-provoking package. Okay, I would like to just come back on one point that he has stressed, and stress it even further. In these days of journalism, where you can end up on a production line and it's bang, 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 you have to keep a little flicker in the back of your brain. That what Paraic calls the hang-on moment, okay? That just suddenly clicks in, right? Okay. And if you take anything away, please take that away as advice. Otherwise, I'd like to say thanks very much. Slightly disappointed you didn't drink the coffee, right? Okay. I can proudly say I've never turned down a cup of coffee anywhere.
I did drink. I drank the coffee in the canteen, by the way.
Well, that's the one that's going to get you. No, okay. Just like to close, I don't know how quick you have to be away, but I don't know if you can hang around for 5 or 10 minutes.
Yeah,
at
of course.
The very least.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
if anyone does want to grab Paraic, but if we can just show Paraic appreciation.